My name is Idrees Kahloon. I'm the U.S. policy correspondent for The Economist. I wanted to write the special report on poverty because it's an issue that's been often neglected by politicians on both the left and the right. The preoccupation in American politics now is with the middle class and the precarity of the middle class now, given the rising costs of healthcare and education and housing. All of those things affect the poor in America much harder than they do the middle class, and yet there is comparatively little attention devoted to them. That's not to say that the problem doesn't exist or that we fixed poverty in the last half century. It's merely that we've stopped talking about it as much. The will to make things better for poor children, I haven't seen it yet. In the Senate, a version of a child allowance has been proposed by two senators, Michael Bennet from Colorado and Sherrod Brown from Ohio, but it hasn't gone very far. I don't imagine that it will in the subsequent years. So perhaps that's a pessimistic note, but it doesn't seem like poor children are at the center of anyone's campaign. A lot of on the Democratic side, which might be the place that you would expect these kinds of ideas to be emanating from. The focus is on things like Medicare for all and a Green New Deal and maybe tax credits for renters, all sorts of things that aren't this. And in part that's because the appeal is to a wider swath of America. It's to middle-class Americans who are much more important voting base than poor Americans who generally don't turn out to the polls at all. And it also gets wrapped up in the eternal debate about whether providing benefits to poor people actually encourages them, actually helps stabilize them, or promotes dependency, which is a debate that America is still undergoing. One reason that the report focuses so much on children, and poor children in particular, is one, that they're morally blameless. You can't blame a child for their poverty. With an adult, people want to engage in discussions of culpability, and I understand that. But with children, that discussion is moot. And the second point is that poor adults today, by and large, a lot of them were poor children before. What happens when they cross the threshold of 18 is that we sometimes think that now that they're adults, it must have been a choice that they made. But we know a lot of this stuff is reinforced from generation to generation. This report spends a lot of time analyzing poverty through statistics, which are important if you want to gain an understanding of the population and how it's changed over time. But one thing that is relatively harder to measure is just the debilitating psychological impact that this has on poverty, because ultimately it's a scarcity of resources, and it's one that requires a constant amount of calculation and worry about things like when the next rental check might be paid, where the next batch of food might come from, what can be done about your children. These are all things that it's difficult for government statistics to capture, but it is, I think, when you talk to people who have experienced poverty, it is the overwhelming feeling of it. And it's one that has this perverse effect of, and it's this feeling that has a perverse effect of actually lengthening the spell of poverty. People do come out, but being in a situation where you have to only think about what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 days, it limits your ability to plan for the future. It limits your ability to make sound financial decisions because you just don't have the income at that time. And all of those things compound on each other and I think make the experience harder to escape from. It's common to write about places that have been poor for a long while as if they're without hope, or as if the people who are there have all uniformly lost hope, and that's certainly not the case of any of the places that I went to. You always will find people who haven't given up on their homes and who are trying quite hard to make sure that it is better for their children and better for the generations that come after. And that's an important thing that I don't think has been broadcast as much, in part because people are quite concerned about highlighting the plight of these places, and that stuff is real. But an equally real facet of it is the fact that there are people who are trying quite hard to make things better for themselves and for their children.